Steph Roberts. I'm with the South Central Kansas Problem Gambling Task Force. We're one of the regional task forces associated with the gaming zones in Kansas that surround local state-owned casinos. We're also have several members of the Kansas Governor's Behavioral Health Prevention Subcommittee attending and available for questions. So we have 4 presenters today. We're going to start off with me speaking about current gambling legislation. At the moment, this is a hot topic going on within the legislature, and it's our mission to ensure that gambling-related venues and programs include protective measures to mitigate the harms for those who may develop problems from these games. It is important that you weigh in the balance, the pros and cons of any legislation that might be worked on. And so this first slide is talking about those pros and cons. And one of the pros definitely is the increased revenue that Kansas will see if it is voted in. The cons, however, are the increased bankruptcies for Kansas, the increased suicides, gambling-related embezzlements, and gambling-related relationship problems. The National Council on Problem Gambling, which is the NCPG, did a review of over 140 sports wagering and gambling addiction studies, and they found the following concerns. One is that sports bettors have a higher rate of gambling problems than other types of gamblers. It's at least twice as high. And those, because of easy accessibility, the likelihood that they're going to gamble more increases. 45% of sports betting currently does take place online. And so other states have legalized this, but even before some of those states made it legal, there was illegal gambling going on in sites in different parts of the world. Sports bettors also who use mobile devices have a higher incidence of problem gambling. The aggressive marketing and advertising promotions that these types of venues may use will make it more difficult for those who are sports bettors to try to reduce their gambling because of the regular triggers. And young people have higher rates of gambling problems than adults. So 75% of students already acknowledged gambling, and that was from data from 2018. But now with the increased number of phones that youth are carrying, that number probably will be going up. And Patricia, we're not on speaker view, I don't think. There are 2 sides to every issue. So if you do vote in sports betting, please include protective measures, because it's not all about the money. It's about the health of Kansans. And there's some things I'd like you to consider. And whoops, sorry. Will the revenue that's gained from legalizing any sports betting mitigate the social costs for Kansans who may suffer from gambling-related harms? The revenue that comes directly out of each gambler's personal account, so that can lead to very dire financial consequences for those folks. You'll see an increased number of bankruptcies, suicides, divorces, and gambling-related crime. So some individuals can limit their betting, but others are unable to stop. The way that gambling affects the brain leads to compulsion sometimes to keep playing, despite the fact that it may not be in their best interest at that moment. This slide is just to give you an example of what the state-owned casinos brought in the month of November. This was their revenue, which you can see the individual casinos portion, but the total revenue was $31,723,751. This slide shows the fiscal year 2022 allocations that are going to be put into the Problem Gambling and Other Addictions Fund from the 4 state-owned casinos. So for 2022, that totals $3,306,742. However, do not get confused. This is not how much money is actually going toward helping problem gamblers. This is just how much money is going into that fund. The State Gaming Revenue Fund, which comes from the Kansas Lottery Report, shows some of the other programs that benefit by the state-owned casino revenue. And if you'll notice at the bottom, only 80,000 out of that actually goes into that problem gambling fund, but even that doesn't necessarily go toward problem gambling. This slide shows you that in fiscal year 21, which was July 1st, 2020 to June 30th of 2021, the state-owned casinos raised $374 million. They transferred 22% of that to the state of Kansas, and another 3% to the city, county, and gaming zones. And these are the areas that surround the state-owned casinos. For example, I'm in Cedric County, and we cover an 8-county area for this gaming zone. So 3% went to like the city of Wichita, Mulvane, those kind of things. And then 2% of that revenue the casinos earned goes into the Problem Gambling and Other Addictions Fund, and that is sent to the Kansas Department on Aging and Disability Services. And so that total amount, that 2%, was $7.5 million. Again, do not get confused, because that does not all go to problem gambling. In fact, out of that $7.5 million, only $625,000 was budgeted and spent on problem gambling services. So those services include treatment, clinical support, prevention, education, and awareness services, which covers the grants that the task forces and coalition get to help spread the message that help is available, and to help people understand that there are responsible gambling rules that they could follow to kind of help mitigate some of the harms. It also goes for staff development. We have Kansas certified gambling counselors across the state who can provide counseling services to those who get into trouble. And I'm happy to see that with this budget, 61%, the largest percentage, actually did go for treatment, and the next highest percentage went to the prevention, education, and awareness. So I do feel that the 625 is being spent appropriately, but the reality is this amount of 625 has gone down over the last several years. It used to be a little bit more. At the present time, we only have 2 problem gambling specialists. In the past, we had 4, 1 for each gaming zone. We also used to have a statewide media campaign. Now, any media that's done is done by the coalition or the problem gambling task forces in those regions, and that budget is not enough to cover increasing awareness across the state. So we are proposing and encouraging people to put in protective measures if there is new legislation voted in. The first one that needs to be under consideration is the protections to prevent youth from using betting sites. Currently, some online apps do require that you show a driver's license or some form of identification so that they can prevent that. But this needs to be included in legislation to make sure that that preventive measure is available here in Kansas also. Again, 2% of the revenue should be credited to the Problem Gambling and Other Addictions Fund, but this time it should be mandated for use for problem gambling prevention, education, and treatment for those who are impacted by problem gambling. That would make sure that more of the monies actually went toward helping those whose pocketbooks are actually funding the fund. So we also feel like you should ensure that advertising for sports betting um, be required. The state-owned casinos and lottery already are required to do this, and they have to list the problem gambling helpline number. This number is the client's um, gateway to accessing counseling services when they get in trouble. So it's very important. They also can refer them to GA meetings in their area and again, connect them to services. We also want to see mechanisms to allow players to self-ban or to set spending limits. There are some of these sports betting applications in other states that already include that. We think Kansas should also have that. This is a protective measure to help those who recognize that they're spending too much to start to limit their spending so that they don't get themselves in financial harm. And the last one is we also feel that those who do self-ban, if they violate that self-ban, which means they somehow gain access and try to gamble while they're still on the ban that they created, those folks should be referred for counseling to a Kansas certified gambling counselor so that hopefully some kind of intervention could take place. So all gambling can impact the social, emotional, and financial well-being of our communities. And if you only look at what's gained and not what is lost, our citizens and our communities are going to suffer much more than what it gains. So these folks are counting on you, including provisions in the legislation to protect Kansans affected by sports betting will ensure that those who seek help will be able to receive it. Additional monies will be needed to meet the increased demand for treatment help and to train additional KCGCs, which are Kansas Certified Gambling Counselors. After all, the money that the players spend on gambling is what would fund these services. And remember, Kansans are counting on you to balance the pros and cons of any piece of legislation. And I am going to pass the baton on to Joanne Browse-Klein, who will be presenting on the next series of slides. Joanne, you want to take over?
Yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you for spending your time. And I thank you so much to the other people that are going to follow me. Just real briefly, when Kansas was considering bringing the expanded or the casinos in, expanding the Lottery Act in 2007, they actually did a impact study, and all the things that Stephanie earlier mentioned, the increased divorce, increased substance use disorder, increased crime, all of that. When they brought that in, before they even voted on the act, they voted on the 2% fund. And I want to so much say to people that the money that goes into the 2% fund, of which problem gambling actually only gets 10%, and that's been decreasing, that's not one penny of tax dollar, and that's not one penny of charity dollar. The gamblers have already put that money in, and that going forward, any increased legislation, we really have to look at the same kind of thing, only this time make sure that the money will actually go to help the individuals that are harmed by the revenue that's coming in. And that's through promoting awareness and recovery and education. And in this case, education really is prevention. Gambling disorder is a defined mental disorder, and that has been internationally, it's the next slide, Stephanie, for over 4 decades that it's been in the DSM. In 2018, the World Health Organization and Europe recognized gaming disorder, a pattern of digital or video gaming characterized by impaired control over gaming, estimating that 3 to 4% of the persons who game meet the clinical criteria for gambling disorder, and the average age is younger. This is average, it's 24. Both gambling disorder and gaming disorder are progressive. They have great personal, social, financial, and legal consequences. Okay, I see. Okay. The concerns about, and this is the one that I think I wanted to go. Yes, Stephanie, can you go forward one slide?
Two.
Well, no, I'll just say that concerns that we look at accessing treatment are a lot of people are unaware of how to access the fact that most people don't even know that there is a fund that the gamblers have paid forward, in essence, by their losses. So we need to increase the lack of knowledge regarding the signs of addiction so that people know ahead of time, and marketing messages that can, I think we're on a different one, environmental factors here. But anyway, that there are things that cause people to maybe not access this, worried about some of the stigma. And gambling disorder is called the hidden addiction because most of the other substance addictions, by the point it gets really, really significant, other people can see it. And lots of times with gambling, people can be on the verge of losing everything and they're walking around and nobody can see it from the outside. Environmental.
Do you want to go back or do you want to go forward?
Go forward if you can. Yes. Okay. We have a lot of science. We know what area of the brain is most impacted by this, and it's actually the nucleus accumbens. It impacts the substance use disorders as well. But with gambling or gaming disorder, the two most predictive factors are access and the time spent doing that. And so the bills that are before us, where people can do it any place on their phone, it's always going to be accessible. We can expect for the we really can expect for the prevalence rate to go up. And so the environmental factors, and I wanted to say that one first, because when we're looking at the environmental role, and in essence, the role that this legislation is going to play, the accessibility is going to be far greater. The marketing, there's triggers urges, reinforces the craving. Even now, it's difficult to watch any major sports event on TV without the commercials coming on for gaming. And the lack of knowledge, most people, they understand that tobacco or drugs or alcohol are addictive. Many people have no idea that you actually can develop a very severe addiction to gaming or gambling. So we want to be able to counter the marketing with prevention and education. And as gambling becomes and gaming becomes more socially acceptable, we're just going to see more of it. We need to have structural supports, and those were the things that Stephanie mentioned: the voluntary exclusion, the fact that there's treatment, available, and financial and legal structural pieces in there. We have documented. So if you want to go forward to documented comorbidities. Gambling impact and behavioral studies document that gambling disorder is associated with comorbid divorce, increased divorce, mental health problems. And I will point out a little bit later, gambling disorder has the highest suicide rate of any clinical population. And I think that in part that is, it is the hidden addiction. And that lots of times people have no idea how to get help or even what to do until they really don't see any other way. There's job loss, lost wages, bankruptcies, crimes. And, I will just and incarceration. And I know that if somebody bothered to talk with some of the 18th Judicial District, and I'm sure it's other places, the probation officers are seeing a lot more of individuals that are on probation for crimes committed secondary to gambling. There's common, and later we'll have somebody, a family member talking, but common problems reported by families. Gambling does not, as with any addiction, does not just affect the gambler. It affects the people in their immediate circle, the family members, but it also affects the community in terms of things that I've already gone over. Loss of household money, trust issues. One of the diagnostic criteria is lies to conceal their gambling or their losses. Lots of times there's neglect of family. A few years ago, we were giving a presentation and there was a student there that was helping with the check-in and all that, and talked about at 6 years old, her mother leaving her in charge, and there would be no younger siblings, and there would be no food and no supervision. It can lead, out of the desperation can come the anger and violence. And the confusion of family roles is when you leave children in responsible positions for something that's for adults. And it also, there's a higher rate of gambling disorder or other addictions in the other family members affected. Next slide. Okay. I served on the Cedric County Suicide Prevention Coalition. And this is a slide that I was on the committee that we developed a presentation that any of the members of the coalition could give, talks to the community for suicide prevention. And I was struck, and you all work in prevention, so that correlation does not mean causation. But when I saw this particular, and I believe that the blue line is Cedric County. When I saw this the first time that it was compiled, and I looked at 07, and Cedric County is way up there. And I know I started seeing people in my practice, and it was like, what is happening here? And I started realizing a significant increase. And I started realizing that that's when all of the casinos on the border with Oklahoma were opening up, and so many people were going there. If you look at 2012, and if you remember 2009, when the economy tanked and Wichita was really impacted by that, you really don't see very much, but then you have what was a double-digit increase from 11 to 12. And we cannot say, we can't say the cause, but I do want to point out the correlation. That was the first full year that Kansas Star was open. And if it has anything to do with like what I was seeing in my practice, I was seeing as many people in a month as what I would have seen in 6 months previous to that. So I just want people to be aware that these are real lives. And if you notice, both Kansas and Cedric County are a lot higher. So that's a whole nother issue. And I'm sure that there are people presenting on suicide prevention, but these, gambling isn't the only factor, but it is a well-documented for decades factor that the highest suicide rate of any clinical population is among problem gamblers. Consequences, next slide. Consequences in Kansas: loss of time from work or school, lost or jeopardized career or educational opportunities. 75 or 70. Okay, well, this isn't the one I have, so I'll go with the one that you have in front of here. Back on the suicide, the passive ideation is 75% in the comorbid group. Active suicidal thoughts, 70%. Prior attempts, 41%. This is by the time people are going into the inpatient treatment. And this is by Heather Chapman with Brookville. And she is a researcher and everything, but it's just, something that we have to look at in the legislation and put the safeguards into that. Next slide. Okay. This is the consequences evidence in Kansas. 72% borrowed from family or friends. 66% had difficulty paying for basic household expenses. I've worked a lot with the Center of Hope. They have seen a lot of this. They work with homelessness prevention. They've seen increase with working with problem gamblers. 57% use equity or savings to gamble. Many times they will liquidate all of that. And by the way, these are, some people obviously have marked more than one of these. 47% use payday loans. And you think about the number of payday loans that you see around now that you did not. 39% defaulted on those loans. 33% had written bad checks. And then you have the attempted and completed suicides that have increased. Next slide. I think that's the last one. The legal impact of gambling disorder is devastating for the gambler, the family, the victims of financial crime, and is costly to the state for prosecution, incarceration, and probation. 30% of individuals have committed illegal acts, 30%. And again, this is more, we're not looking for 100% here, but because some are in more than one category. But, a third have actually been incarcerated, and you think about the cost. And these are not, at least the ones that I have worked with, are not people that have had any previous scrapes with the law. Perfectly good people with an addiction do desperate things. Is the next one my last one? You can save a life. And this, I really would want to go back to Stephanie's ending. You can save a life by putting safeguards into any increased gambling or gaming legislation, by funding the treatment using the profits that are coming from what's coming in. There are monetary and social costs of this legislation that cannot be ignored. And I just want to say gambling and gaming disorders are identifiable, preventable, and very treatable. And we just need to make sure that we do what we can to make that happen for people. Thank you very much. Now you'll hear from the real experts.
Thanks, Joanne. Can everybody see me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. There I am. My name is Jason Moeller, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you guys today. Appreciate Stephanie and Joanne asking me to be on this meeting with you guys. And I'm here as someone just to kind of tell their story. I am a compulsive gambler in recovery. Been in recovery for almost 3 years now. And I also will offer kind of a different perspective. I'm also an alcoholic and a drug addict in recovery, 4 years from substances. So my goal is I have nothing against the gaming industry. Nobody made me gamble but me. But I will talk. I will mention certain gaming places or online sites, and I mean in no way to talk bad about them or anything. It's about using examples. So for me, I don't want to bore you guys with a huge life story, but I have been an alcoholic and a drug addict from an early age. I went through a lot of trauma in childhood and learned early in life to deal with that with substances. The first time I took a drink, I was 10 years old, and I felt relief. And that's really what I would look for the rest of my life. I went to my first substance abuse treatment center when I was 14 years old. And obviously, gambling for me, I gambled for the first time when I was 10 years old. I played in a poker game with my brother-in-laws, who both ended up being compulsive gamblers as well. And, I was 10 years old. So it's not like I started gambling all the time. But what did happen when I was 14 or 15 is we had the dog track here in Wichita, which was open then. And was able to get in there as a 14 or 15-year-old and actually won a superfecta bet. Me and three buddies split it 4 ways at $6 a piece, and we hit it and won like $1,500. And I just remember thinking, this is it. I mean, this is so easy, why don't I do this more often? And so we went to the dog track here and there, and I never won again. And gambling didn't take off for me. Alcohol and drugs really dominated my life, and I was in and out of sobriety number of periods in my life, but finally I sobered up from opiates and from benzos in 2018, March of 2018. So I was able to be a functioning addict. I learned early on that to protect your addiction, you had to hide it and you couldn't get caught. So gambling for me and the compulsive lying, it fit right in there. And I had actually sobered up in 2008, and I'd been sober for a couple of years. I was single. I'd gotten into corporate America, and I started playing a lot of poker. It was kind of when the poker craze happened with, on TV, and the World Series of Poker and World Poker Tour and all that stuff was getting popular. And I got into playing poker. I was living in Denver at the time, so I started by going to the Indian casinos in Black Hawk, Colorado. And eventually I met people up there who had home games. And even though I was sober, I started playing poker 4 or 5 nights a week and started gambling compulsively and really not even knowing it. Being in recovery from substance abuse, there should have been a red flag. But I was single, I didn't have children, and the gambling financially was not causing problems for me because I wasn't gambling away large amounts of money. And actually, I found that most of the time I won. It seemed kind of like an easy way to make money. So fast forward to me being 32, I'm 46 now. And I met my wife, and I moved here and got married. And back then, the Kansas Star was just about to open. But I never pursued gambling like I did when I lived in Denver. Now, things I was doing, I was buying lottery tickets every week. Still have this dream of easy money, and buying Mega Millions tickets and Powerball tickets, and just throwing money away on that kind of stuff. But what I didn't realize is the obsession for the quick win, for the quick fix, was already kind of cemented into my head. And unfortunately, in 2013, after 5 years of substance sobriety, I suffered an injury and was given painkillers, and just was not in a good place in my recovery at the time. And once again, I felt that relief that I had been missing out on. And so again, not to bore you guys to death, but I had gotten into the pharmacy business, and I was a partner in a long-term care pharmacy. So you guys can guess where the opiate addiction went from there. And I ended up losing my professional career in 2016 altogether. I had some medical licenses I was stripped of, and it was a very humiliating, shameful, just, it was a tough time, and I couldn't get myself sober from the opiates, but I wanted so bad to prove myself and to show my family that I could redeem myself. So I started trading Bitcoin, day trading Bitcoin in spring of 2017 when that got hot. And I made a lot of money up front. And then, like a good compulsive, obsessive person, I bought back in at the high point of Bitcoin. And overnight, one particular night, South Korea halted trading and Bitcoin was cut in half. So I lost all the money I gained, and then I lost several $100,000 more. So again, I wanted an easy fix. And the only thing I could think of was playing poker online. So at that time, that's what I started to do. I have never been a casino gambler. All my gambling has been done online. So that's kind of why I'm here talking to you guys today. And my goal is really just to educate and help people understand what's different about online gambling versus casino gambling. And so by the time I end up in treatment in March of 2018, I've gone through most of my life savings.